We live in a time, and I don't think this is unique to our time, but it's certainly been heightened in our time, where you really are encouraged to seek out that that time where everybody looks at you. We live in a society, whether it's digital media, Facebook and Twitter and Snapchat and YouTube and everything else, where everybody has a chance to have their own voice and have their own saying. Certainly we see all kinds of times where, whether it's athletes or music people or actors and actresses, they're put up on this pedestal of here's what you should be like, here's what you should look like, here's what you should act like, here's what you should have. And I think that all those things sometimes present unrealistic expectations on, what can be who we are. And, whether it's the athlete who wrecks his Lamborghini, or whether it's the actress who wears the $18,000 gowns at the Emmys, or whatever it happens to be, I think those are all, for most of us, those are unrealistic expectations of, my life's not going to be like that. But I do think that there is that piece that's put on us in our society of, but you should be special. You should be important, and you should be special in a certain way. I mean, we already are special. And we already are people who have been set apart by God. We are people who've been given God's grace. We have, in our baptism, we are marked with the cross of Christ forever. We are sealed by God's Holy Spirit. We can't get much more special than that. And yet, I think that sometimes we find ourselves continually seeking that attention, that approval around us, and sometimes even in our own mind. I'm reminded of an old song. A song from my childhood was by Kenny Rogers, called "The Greatest." So the song, you don't have to know the song, but it's this little boy coming out with his ball and his bat, and I am the greatest there has ever been. And so he comes up and he throws the ball up and he swings and he misses. That's all right. I'm still the greatest there has ever been. So he goes up for number 2 and throws it up and goes again, swings, and it hits the ground again. Okay, this is that Davy Jones moment. Two pitches have passed by, but this is where it really counts. So I really am the greatest there has ever been. And so he throws up that ball that third time, and he takes that swing, and he hits nothing but air. And then as he's walking back with his ball in his glove, and he goes, I am the greatest there has ever been, but even I didn't know I could pitch like that. I think sometimes that our minds can be really agile about that too, of saying, okay, yeah, here's where I thought I was the greatest, here's where I thought I was the greatest, nope, it's over here. But somehow I've got to be the best. I've got to be that which is most important. And again, I've had so many times in my life where I've had to be reminded, really, it's not about that. But our life is not about that. Our life is not one to be where we're put up on a pedestal above everybody else. I think that's very easy to be in that. And I think that can become very addictive, where we want other people to treat us a certain way because we're the boss, or because we have a certain title, or we have a certain education, or any kind of other reason. But we follow a God who came to serve. In Jesus, we know what God is like, and God comes not to be served, but served. I was reminded this week of a story I heard, and I can't tell you with 100% accuracy that this story is 100%. But it's a story I remember from military history. So, coming out of World War II, there were all kinds of generals that people knew their name. There was Patton. There was MacArthur. These were the kind of big, flamboyant people. There was Eisenhower. He wasn't near as flamboyant, but people knew him. They knew Bradley, but everybody knew about Patton. Everybody knew about MacArthur. Because they would do things like MacArthur's "I will return," and then staging that return coming in off the landing craft. And in the aftermath of World War II, the country eventually found itself in the midst of the Korean War. That's kind of been the forgotten war in the United States. And there was a general that I came to know of actually before I really knew much about Korea at all. I happened to be flipping through my grandfather's book from when he was in First of the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment in World War II. And there weren't many comments on there. But there was this one picture. It was the commanding general of the 82nd Airborne at that point. And my grandfather does not give out compliments, especially to officers. He was an old master sergeant. He did not give out compliments to officers very much at all. But on this one picture, it was unusual. Best officer in the entire Army. It was Matthew Ridgway. At that point, commander of the 82nd Airborne during his time in North Africa and then Italy. And then he would go over to command all the airborne forces in Europe. Well, at the beginning of the Korean War, as the U.S. forces are being pushed back, the commander of the U.S. 8th Army died. And so they have to find a new commander. And so they pull this guy from who served over in Europe, Matthew Ridgway, to come and take over. So you have to understand a few dynamics here. So the force he was taking over is mainly Marines. This guy's Army. So there's been, for years and years and years, this back and forth between, can the Marines learn anything from the Army? Well, can the Army learn anything from the Marines? So there's that dynamic going back and forth. The other reality is in World War II, there was the Pacific War and there was the Atlantic War. There was the war in Europe and there was the war in the Pacific. And the people in the Pacific felt like, the people in the Atlantic got all the credit. They were the ones who, we pay attention to the fact that, they beat the Nazis, they beat back Mussolini, but the war in the Pacific actually lasted longer and was more costly. And so here's this guy who's coming into, and not only this, he was also in charge of the airborne forces. So if you've ever been around the airborne, they're a little bit unusual. They wear different uniforms than everybody else. They have these boots that are designed so they can shine up nice and pearly and like glass. And they started wearing berets like their British counterparts did, and so they set themselves apart in that way too. And so here's this guy who's done all these things that's different, and he's going to come in and supposedly take over this force. And there's a story of, in the midst of that retreat, and coming down in Korea, these Marines are in retreat. They are moving across these snow-covered plains back down to where they're going to be kind of regroup, start over. And there's a story that Ridgway's Jeep pulls up to this Marine infantry convoy, kind of making their way, trudging through the snow. He stops the vehicle, pulls out his glass, just looking at these troops that he's now in command of. And he notices that one of the young Marine privates walking along with his boot untied. For most of us, you think about, okay, if my shoe's untied, I just reach down and tie my shoe and I keep moving. But when you're moving, when you're moving information, but also when you're moving with in excess of 60 pounds on your back, leaning down to tie your shoe is not as easy as it sounds. When you stop, you're stopped. Until you can get back, you're like a turtle on your back. When you have that rucksack on, you're like a turtle on your back until you can get flipped back over and get back up. So he comes up and he stops the formation. And here's this 3-star at this point. General comes up, stops the formation, goes up to this Marine private, ties his shoe, and tells the commander, okay, keep moving. How long do you think it takes that instance to pass all throughout that army? Not long. All of a sudden, this becomes, this is arduous. And it becomes one of these things to where it becomes almost legendary in that time. And Ridgway actually does become kind of a legendary figure in that little era, that little time. He eventually ends up taking over from MacArthur for the Korean War. But sometimes it's those little things. If here's this person who, could certainly have said, okay, here's this other person, and they don't merit my time. They don't merit my attention. I'm at the top of the totem pole, they're at the bottom. And there's a lot more down at the bottom than there is up at the top, and I have other things I could be doing. This is below me. And I think sometimes that belief that, this is below me is where we sometimes miss where Jesus is present. You know, I've had lots of times in my life where I've had to kind of say, you know, I'll be engaged in something and someone will come up and say, well, but we need you to put your attention over. You know, we can do this. We need you to do this. That's fine. But for me, it can never be one of these things of, you know, but I'm too good for this. I'm too good. You know, I continually have to, and maybe this is just ingrained in me as a child of this is what it is. You know, if we're going to be a Christian, this is what leadership looks like. That ultimately it's not that I'm the greatest. That if I'm given that position of authority, I'm put in that position, then I'm a servant to all these people. You know, I've had 2 times in my life where I've been set aside in different ways. Once when I was commissioned as an officer in the Army, and once when I was ordained. And again, I've seen certainly times where in both of those positions where people begin to think, and because I'm set aside this way, I'm better than other people, or I'm somehow above other people. And for me, both of those times, it's always meant these are me being set aside to find ways in which I'm a servant. I somehow have a responsibility to, you know, whether it was in the Army, these men who were assigned to me, and at that point it was all men, or whether it was in church where, okay, this is the congregation I'm called to serve. It's not that somehow they're called to serve me, but I'm called to serve them. And it's not just a call that begins at those places. It's a call that for all of us begins at that place where we're set aside by God. We're all marked. We're all separate. We're all special. We're all people who are marked by God, who, you know, and it begins when we're children. For God places us in the midst of other disciples and said, this is what you're to be like. You're to be that one who maybe asks questions, who doesn't maybe have that much to contribute right now, but you will. And doesn't have that much where people can say to you, here's why, you know, here's what Neil can do at this point. You know, the old UPS thing, what can Brown do for you? It's not, you know, we don't bring children into worship for what can they do for us right now. Bring them in because that's what Christ places people in our midst. And I think sometimes that's where we meet Jesus. That's where we find Jesus. In those places where we kind of take off all those airs, all those things that we think that, hey, I'm entitled to this, and we say, oh, can I really encounter this other person right? Can I take time? Can I spend that time with this other person? You know, I think there are lots of places where we meet Christ in our worship, but I think there's also an awful lot of places where we meet Christ out in the midst of our world. And I think that's one of the things that I think that I don't call attention to. You know, I have a role, and a lot of my role is serving you as church. But you also have all these roles where you're serving other people out in the midst of the world. And I wonder how many times in the midst of the week Christ meets you. In your job. In your family. In your friends. In that chance encounter that comes up in the grocery store. I don't know. But I'm convinced that Christ is out there. And I think that sometimes we can be in that position where we begin to think that we're so special or we're so set apart that we miss it. You know, Jesus' disciples also struggled with who's going to be the greatest. You know, they've come down from the mountain. This is shortly after Peter, James, and John have gone up in the mountain and they've seen Jesus transfigured before them. And so Peter, James, and John got to see this and nobody else did. And so maybe that's part of it. Maybe part of it is after they come down from the mountain and the other 9 have not been able to cast out this demon. And so Jesus comes and casts out the demon from the epileptic boy. And, you know, well, aren't we special? You know, right after this, there's a scene where there's a man who's casting out demons, and he's not one of the 12, and there's 12 try and stop him because he's not one of them. And Jesus says, no, don't stop him. No, but I think that there's always going to be that part of us that says, but aren't I important enough? And the answer is yes, you are. Maybe not in the way that the world tells you you need. We don't have to come up and think, either I'm the greatest slugger or the greatest pitcher or, the greatest pastor or the greatest teacher or the greatest mom or dad or, and I think, again, we have so many times where the world puts on us, in this role, this is what you need to be. But in our baptisms, God said, I love you as you are. You're already my child. You already have value. You don't need anything else. And that's all the gift that we need. And Jesus on that Holy Thursday, that where he celebrates with the disciples the Lord's Supper, he takes on that role of servant for Lord's Supper, washes their feet. He does that which they don't expect. He washes their feet. He invites them in, not as one who comes expecting them to do the same for him, but instead as one who says, I come to you, I come to serve, because this is what I'm like. This is what it is to be greatest. First among you must be willing to be the last, must be willing to be servant, must be willing to be like this child that I place in your midst. You must know that you're valued just because you're valued, not because of what you bring. I think that's where we begin to understand what grace is all about. Where we begin to see in ourselves and in others, we're valued just for who we are. And maybe that's the reason that from very young on, that, I have times where I get loose track too, where the world convinces me that, hey, I need to be special in some certain way, or that I'm entitled to this or that. But for the most part, I think it's been grounded in me pretty early that I'm not that special in any other way except the way that God has made me special. That the roles, whichever role I've been in, I've always had people tell me, well, you're not supposed to do that. You let us do that. But I've always enjoyed getting my. I've always enjoyed being a part of it. And I think that's a place where God has allowed me to see sometimes God's presence. So this week, pay attention to who you are. Pay attention to who you really are. You're a baptized child of God. You don't need anything else. You don't need any other title. You don't need any other acclamation. Pay attention also to the others around you. Have that same title. There's not a person that you're going to meet this week. There's not a person. God loves. God values. And who may be a person where Christ meets you. So pay attention. And I'd be curious to see this week, where do you meet? Is it in the child? Is it in the other person? Is it in the work itself? I don't know, but I trust Jesus. Thanks be to God.